Good evening and a very warm welcome to all of you in Zoom land from St. Francis Retreat Center here, and welcome to this weekend's retreat on facing mortality and the mystery of immortality. And I'm sure our presenter is no stranger to most of you, but for those of you this may be your first experience of Brother Don Bisson, just to say he's first and foremost a spiritual director and widely respected as a specialist in training other spiritual directors and in formation as well as supervision of spiritual directors. Brother Don Bisson is a Marist brother from the community of Esopus in New York. He has a graduate degree in liturgy, spirituality, and transpersonal psychology, and earned a doctorate of ministry in the Pacific School of Religion, specializing in spiritual direction and Jungian psychology. With more than 90 live audio recordings available, Brother Bisson is internationally recognized as a lecturer, a workshop leader, retreat leader on the interrelationship between Christian spirituality and Jungian psychology. So a very warm welcome to Brother Don and to all of you attending this retreat. Take it away.
Thank you. First of all, whenever somebody reads that, I feel exhausted at the end. I'm doing all that, I should be in bed. The second thing is, I want to inform you that it's over 100 CDs now. I was still productive during the time of the pandemic, so we'll update you during the course of the weekend. If you could take out your handout, the one that has the monk in Jonah and the Whale. And the first thing is a poem by Jessica Powers, which we'll use as our opening prayer. Jessica Powers was a Carmelite nun, but also a known poet. And this poem was written in 1948. And I think it's a beautiful poem for this topic. She says, I'm copying down in a book from my heart's archives the day that I ceased to fear God with a shadowy fear. Would you name it the day that I measured my column of virtue and sighted through windows of merit a crown that was near? Ah, no, it was rather the day I began to see truly that I came forth from nothing and ever towards nothingness tend. And the works of my hands are foolishness wrought in the presence of the worthiest king in a kingdom that shall never end. I rose up from the acres of self that I tended with passion and defended with flurries of pride. I walked out of myself and went into the woods of God's mercy, and here I abide. There is greenness and calmness and coolness, a soft leafy covering from the judgment of sun overhead and the hush of his peace and the moss of his mercy to tread. I have not, but my seeking God, even love burning in me, is a fragment of infinite loving and never my own. And I fear God no more. I go forward to wander forever in a wilderness made of his infinite mercy alone. The monks here and religious throughout the world pray some form of the office in which, there's a cycle of psalms. And I used to read this psalm in one way. Now I'm reading the psalm in another way. The psalm goes like, all my days pass away. Our years of life are 70 or 80 for those who are strong. Yet their span is but toil and trouble. They pass swiftly and we are gone. Teach us to number our days that we may gain wisdom of heart. Well, you know, when you're 30 and you say, oh, when you're strong, you're 70 or 80. When you're more than 70 and going towards 80, it has a different feel. Like, okay, here I have arrived to understand this song. I used to understand it intellectually. Now I understand it experientially. And most of us, we have a young couple here, and we're happy to have you. Much of this might apply to your parents and grandparents, but it's good for you to hear that as you begin life, life is precious and you have to use every moment because it will end. And if you don't live each precious moment, you will regret what you haven't lived or haven't loved. I was, several years ago, I had a very bad fall, and I ended up in a nursing facility for 2 years after 3 surgeries, physical therapy, more physical therapy, another surgery, more physical therapy. And at this facility, a lot of our brothers who were elderly or dying were also there. And in that time, there were probably 5 or 6 brothers that had died. And some of them had no family, so we would be with them, you know, at the end. And our tradition is, as brothers, is that as somebody is passing, you know, that we stay in the room and we say the rosary throughout the night out loud so that the person can hear it. So it was my turn, okay? And this person had no family left. So you're praying the Hail Mary, and at the end of the Hail Mary, it says, and at the hour of our death, okay? So the hospice nurse tells me, you know, he's going soon, you know, when he goes, please come and get me. So I'm praying, and Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. And then at the hour of our death, he had his last gasp, and I recorded it at 4:19 p.m. was his moment of his last breath. Now, I have said that Hail Mary millions of times, you know, from the time you're a little kid and you're dragged to funerals and you'd have to say umpteen numbers of French Canadians, you know, would say the rosary forever. And at the hour of our death was like, and at the hour of our death, amen. And at the hour of our death, amen. And then this was like, at the hour of our death, there is an hour and there is a moment. It's not theoretical, it's real. At the hour of our death, there is a moment in which we were born, okay? And I remember it, you know, I was born the morning of February 2nd at 1:56 a.m. In a blizzard in Maine, okay? 1:56. Now, we, you know, like when those of us who are older, I have to keep saying this, they used to have in the cemeteries, right, 19 and then 19, you know, like fill in the blank, you know? And remember that? It used to be like, you know, you would go to, you see your own grave and it'd be like, okay, just fill in the blank. And it was one of those things of like, yeah, this is all real. And we live in a culture of incredible denial around death. We are nearly at 1 million deaths from the pandemic. 1 million. The population of San Francisco is 876,000. So we're talking about greater than the city of San Francisco dying among us. And how many grieving people, and they say for every one person that dies, there's at least 6 significant people in their lives that are grieving. So that's probably over 6 million people that are in serious grief throughout the country. And yet we're fighting to go back to normal, whatever normal is. We certainly are paying much more attention about back to normal than we are about grieving the 1 million people that are It's like we don't even want to see this. We don't even want to be reminded of it. I had a directee recently that had a wonderful dream in which she had a broken chain, and it was repaired by a golden thread. And why is that important? Because a golden thread is an archetypal world symbol of life itself. You know, when she says in the poem, we came from an eternity, we came from nothing, and we're going back to nothingness. Well, the golden thread was with us before we were born, and the golden thread exists beyond our death. The golden thread is the connection to the divine. You know, that we are human and connected to the divine. There's a golden thread in our lives. And her chain was broken. And I think, you know, in her own experience, there was a great deal of turmoil and transition in her life. And the chain was broken. The continuity was broken, but her life was not broken. The golden thread weaves itself throughout our lives. I have a number of directees who were raised by agnostics or atheists, secular, materialistic kinds of folks, and that was totally dismissive of religion and spirituality. And I see in these two directees a struggle to regain through intuition the suggestion that God is with us intuitively in our life every day. It's almost as if the materialistic, anti-religious feeling that they grew up with is being tested by their own souls. Their psyche is giving them all kinds of messages in their souls that seem to contradict, you know, the parental voice. And do you know how difficult it is to overcome parental voices, even if they've been dead 40 years? That parental voice is in there, like boom, boom, boom. Good, bad, or indifferent. We deal with this parental voice. And they are, and here's the thing, some people have to be unfaithful to their heritage and to be faithful to themselves. They have to be unfaithful to what they learned in order to be faithful to what's coming forth in them. When we talk about immortality, okay, tonight we're going to talk about mortality. The rest of the weekend is about immortality. And what we're talking about in terms of immortality is an intimation of more. I use the term intimation. We don't have proof, but we have many, many signs. Intimate means it's like pointing to something. And if you pay attention to all the pointing, you get a theme. And the theme is what you see is not all of reality. That there's a serious spiritual living reality in the midst of what we see, and yet so much of what we see is very limited. There's a mystery behind all of this. One of the things we're going to deal with is how dreams point to this mystery about life after death. And there are 4 types of death dreams we're going to look at. The first kind is getting dreams to help prepare a person to transition. There are dreams that actually come to people to almost like midwives, preparing them for the transition. The second are dreams of those who are mourning those who have gone before them. And they have experiences of the grief of the loss. The third is they actually have living encounters with the deceased in their dream. And I'm going to use all kind of case material, which is fascinating to me because as soon as I started doing this workshop preparing, I don't know how many directees had dreams of people who are dead and all of a sudden are appearing in their dreams. There's this thing going on. And the fourth kind of dream are numinous, holy dreams, a sense of otherness, the holy, the eternal. Now, the other day, I'm on the Bronx River Parkway, which is a whole lesson in mortality. And you don't have a lot of sense of immortality. You just have a sense of like, this could be very painful. And there were like 4 young guys on motorcycles, okay? And I'm going, the speed limit is 45. Of course, I'm going 70 to keep up with traffic without being killed. And these young guys are weaving, okay? You know how they weave, you know, like this, okay? Like, I don't know what keeps them, about 95 miles an hour, okay? On the Bronx River. Now I'm saying, with like a little shirt on, I'm saying if they hit something, they are going to be in pieces, okay? But when you're 20, you think you're eternal. No, they don't believe in eternal life. They actually believe that they are eternal. Nothing's going to happen to me. I'm eternal. I will always be 20 years old. I will always be able to do this, right? So we have to learn the difference between the illusion of eternity and the reality of eternity. Because the eternal boy or the eternal girl thinks that they're eternal, but they think their little life here is what's going to be eternal. No, that's not what it is. The real eternal is this intimation within us that there is something more. The last 3 years have been rough on all of us. And I've mentioned this before at workshops, which was very traumatic because the virus hit New York City early in the pandemic when there was no preparation, no realization of what was happening, no vaccine, you know. And from March 2019 on, for at least 3 months, in our community, we heard no traffic and only emergency vehicles because Montefiore Hospital is right near us. So all we heard for 3 months, day and night, was, and I couldn't hear the sound of one without realizing that this was a person in distress. Every one of those was a person in distress. And during those months, there was a day that in New York City, there were 1,000 deaths on that one day. Okay, so mortality was all around you. And the fear of mortality was all around you. You know, remember at the beginning, you washed it, you had bags and you washed the cans when you brought them in because you had no idea how you communicate all that stuff. Makeshift morgues, you know, common burials because there wasn't enough, you know, that's a view of like, nature is cruel, not God, but nature is cruel. You know, it doesn't care who you are. If you're a good person, if you're a bad person, if you're a young person, or you could be a saint or a sinner, nature doesn't care. Okay, you could be 85, you could be 15, it doesn't care. And in the last 45 days, we've been watching, you know, what's happening in Ukraine with dead bodies in the street, and again, you know, makeshift morgues and young people and old people, and just the tragedy of like 10,000 young men in boxes going back to Russia. I mean, I can't imagine the grief, right? Of the girlfriends, the wives, you know, the children, the mothers, the fathers. We're watching this. this is leading to a realization also that our country is also getting much older. And with a decrease of immigration and with decrease of population, we were saying how, all my great nephews and nieces, not the second generation, but the next one, they all have a dog. They don't have a baby. There's no babies around. And if you, at least in our neck of the woods, if you're white, you have a dog or a cat. And there's this aging population, and the view and the signs of this is, as we age, when the baby boomers, which have been dominant in our culture for a long time, when they're all aging and dying, they take a lot of energy and a lot of money and a lot of time, because and I have like 4 signs in my own life of what mortality looked like during those 3 years. One is, one of my best friends in the brothers died of COVID before the vaccine, and he was beloved by many, many people. And, Tom knew him well and worked with him, and it was really a wonderful brother. The second was friends, good friends that have been battling cancer or some kind of really horrible disease in these last 3 years that have made me much more vulnerable to the fact that significant others are passing. The third is the vulnerability of the aged. I have a sister who's 88, and I went to visit her for her birthday. And when people are of that age, it's like, is this going to be the last time I'm going to see you or not? Things do happen. And what was scary is, I left in the morning. I tried to call her just to let her, she always worries about we got there. I said, well, I'll give her a call that, we arrived safely. No answer. Okay, she's deaf. She probably didn't hear it. So the next day I find out she was in the hospital. Out of nowhere, she collapsed and nobody knew what it was. I just said goodbye to her in the morning. And, this is the frailty of life, right? You don't know. You can't control life and death. And therefore, this vulnerability is also looked at, in our own lives, our own. And, when you get to a certain age, you begin to not know the vulnerability, you come to feel the vulnerability. That's a big difference. Okay. I've been traveling a lot in my life, and I've been to Africa and Asia and throughout Europe and Australia. And, you don't think of travel. Now I hate those escalators that are like this, and like 500 steps going down, like used to be, oh, this is great. I would walk down faster than the, now I'm gripping like I don't want to fall, and it's this, you don't know your vulnerability, you feel your vulnerability. And that's the awakening. And that's also true for people who are sick. It doesn't mean just aged. You feel the fact that, you are vulnerable. So I have there a whole list of the collective confrontation with mortality. And some of these I've already mentioned, but I'm just going to highlight some of this is, we are a culture that wants to be in control of everything. And we don't like the sense of powerlessness, right? Powerlessness, we're very afraid of. And we have to recognize that in our powerlessness, there's been a lot of grieving, a lot of letting go, and there's a lot of loss of the normal, which has brought people, it has not brought the best out of us. Don't you find people generally more angry, more curt, more insulting, less patient. So it does bring the best and the worst of us. I have a directee who's an ICU nurse who was gone. She said, I feel like I've been on a roller coaster where at the beginning we would leave work and people were applauding. Now people are fighting with us, telling us that we're causing the disease. And, you're lying to us about the virus. They don't have the virus. You're not telling us the truth. So she said, her thing is like, I don't know where I stand, not only in myself, but in relation to everybody else. Am I the hero or am I the cause of it all? And then some people get into a doomsday scenario. They don't care after a while, which is very dangerous. And there's a loss of events. For years there, we weren't together to bury people. We weren't there to marry people. We weren't there to celebrate, significant things. There was a lot of loss. And our divisions collectively have not gotten better. They've gotten deepened. And I can't imagine at the beginning of the pandemic, if any of us would have said, there will be 1 million deaths in this country from this pandemic. I don't think we would ever have said that was a possibility. So the break denial is usually the only way you break denial of something is that it's pain. Pain breaks denial. You can stay on denial until the pain is so great you can't deny it any longer. And it's been hard because, people haven't been able to go to church. They haven't been able to be part of their regular communities. There's been all kinds of conspiracy theories. And what's really crazy right now is we're watching Putin create an entire country of conspiracy theories, not based on facts at all, completely cut off from the rest of the world. Isn't that frightening? That in this day and age, some of us remember Radio Free Europe, like try and get the truth in there. I mean, to be able to block out a country with 7 time zones, this massive country blocked off from information. So we see, the cracks in our society around not being able to deal with this fact that death is a reality. And, it almost feels like medieval, like Julian of Norwich, you had religious wars, you had plagues, you had all of these things all happening at one time. Well, we have it on a global level, okay? Not on a particular level, but a global level. So this is a very important moment for us collectively and individually to break through this denial and being able to face reality in its starkest form. We will not be able to do this weekend unless we hold the issue of paradox. Paradox means that there is no rational explanation for the paradox, but if you look at it deeply, it holds a truth. So Jesus teaches us continually only through paradoxes. The first shall be last and the last shall be first. That makes no sense. If you're last, you're last. When Jesus talks about, all the paradoxes of life, that unless you die, you will not inherit and be part of the kingdom of God. And that's not only material death, but it's also a psychic death to the ego. I love the poetry of when she says, I rose up from the acres of self. Isn't that a great description of like acres of self? Like when I'm actually obsessed with myself and the whole world could go to hell except for what I'm feeling, that's acres of self. There's no place for anything else. That is, and then she says, I walked out of myself. Now, how does one walk out of oneself? Well, one in freedom walks out of the self of all those acres and begins to notice that there is more to life than self. And that she realized that her love is just a spark, a fragment of infinite love. What she loves, right, is in actuality just a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of God's love. I've not, but by seeing God, even love burning in me is a fragment, a tiny little spark. So I cannot love without God because God is love. And if I love at all, it's because the spark of God is already in me, causing me to love. And I fear God no more in the wilderness of his infinite mercy. Now, those of you that are not familiar with Jung, Carl Jung was a psychologist, born in 1875 and died in 1961. He was the founder of analytical psychology or depth psychology. He had a real curiosity about the interior life and about the movements of the interior life. And he was able to articulate some of the things that really are deeply religious and spiritual, but from a different angle. And he says, and this is the next page, C.G. Jung in these quotes, I'm just going to go through these. He says, the real question that everybody should be holding is, are we related to something infinite or not? In other words, is this it? So what merit a man gain the whole world and lose himself? Okay? I mean, people have billions of dollars and are miserable. It's not about acquiring things. Okay? Jung's point was, if you're not in touch with the infinite inside of you, you will not have peace or hope or meaning. If you think that your ego is it, and you know that your ego is not going to be around forever, then there must be something greater than you in you to give you meaning. That's the whole question of faith. Is there a way to be in relationship to what I call the more, capital M-O-R-E? Do you recognize, as St. Paul says, that we are an earthen vessel that holds a wealth untold? That wealth untold is the fact that God is present in you, and you're holding that mystery, and how you hold that mystery will determine the quality and depth of your life. If you deny its existence and go on egocentric, narcissistic cruise control, that's one whole way of living. But if you take the infinite and the divine seriously, that will shape shift how you make choices, how you live, and the man or woman that you become. They're like two different orientations. Now, the world, what is called the world, the values of the world, okay, really move us towards the finite. The more, the infinite says that no matter what I have, no matter what I do, it's only a piece of the puzzle. I don't see the whole puzzle. Jung does not explicitly mention the body in its mortality as a limiting reality in this, but he gets the existential dilemma. This is a quote from Jung. He says, towards the end of that quote, he says, in my case, Pilgrim's Progress consisted in my having to climb thousands of ladders until I could reach out my hand to the little clod of earth that I am. That most of our life is recognizing not only my mortality, but my creatureliness, that I'm a creature. Every creature has a beginning and an end. We're part of the earth, Remember the Ash Wednesday, remember that you are dust and to dust you shall return. It's a reminder that we came from the earth and we will go back to the earth, that we are creatures. Inflation is when I think that mortality is not going to hit me. I remember years ago, I was in New Orleans, and and this was before the hurricane, and the Museum of Art in New Orleans is a beautiful structure. And I remember seeing a picture there that was, depicting a scriptural passage. And in the passage is this really chubby, fat, rosy-cheeked, this is like Dutch masters type of art, big belly, foam on his beer, like gluttony, look, big pheasant in front of him. And he's having this big feast. And he's dreaming, about building new barns. He's got, it's got so much stuff. I'm going to build new. So on one side, he has like a cartoon, like where he's thinking of, you see these big barns being built. And on the other side, there's this skeleton hovering right over him. Because that's the story. Remember when Jesus says, this very night, this man who thinks he's building new barns and he's got forever to expand, this very night he will be taken. So it's like, here's the dilemma of the ego. Am I continually inflating myself and how much I have? Or do I wrestle with mortality? And in wrestling with mortality, it determines how I live my life. See, if you don't have any connection to mortality, that will change your decision-making. And that's part of the problem. We don't really believe that we're going to go, or that we should prepare. Now I have a very funny brother that I live with, and we have, according to our province policy, what we call the 5 wishes. The 5 wishes. When to pull the plug. When, like it's not the most pleasant thing to fill up. What would you like for your entrance hymn for your funeral? What do you want to wear? Okay, but this brother who refuses to fill it out. Now, for years, I've been putting one of those things under his door. For years, I'd never see it filled out. Because denial is not just a river in Egypt, It's like he can't see how this applies to him. Okay, and I say to him, "You don't fill it out. I'm going to be there to pull the plug first thing." I like to terrorize him with it. But the thing is that our inevitable death is a wake-up call. Our inevitable death is a wake-up call, and you have those. Death is not only for the aged. Death occurs throughout human existence. And the realization that, the length of time here is not of the ultimate value. It's not like, I lived 90 years. It's how you lived your 90 years. How do you live your 90 years, and how do you make decisions along the way? I think this is a very important thing, because when we know the inevitability and we now accept it in reality, you begin to prepare for it differently. Now, from a Jungian perspective, how do you live creatively with the recognition that mortality and the inevitability of death is part of your reality? Well, I have 10 things here that I'd like to talk about. You choose to not isolate, but to be engaged. You choose to be engaged with others. You don't withdraw, you re-engage, but you don't re-engage as you did at 30 years old. You re-engage in an appropriate way, because the answer to mortality is not workaholism. That's just an illusion, you know, because the illusion in workaholism is that I'm so indispensable. How could they live without me? You know, and I have this great example when I had that accident, right? No one had gone into my office for 2 whole years. It'd just been locked. And after 2 years, I went into the office and my calendar was open, like this book, right? And you know what was on my calendar? Dust. And that was the biggest lesson of mortality, because if I had died that night, all the significance of that calendar was completely gone. The workshop and the thing. And you know what I found out? Retreat houses didn't close, directees didn't die. You know, there would have been, sadness for a little while, and that was the end of it. And there was dust. And to me, that was a real lesson of dust on my calendar. So when I am tempted to go wild on my calendar to be 30 again, okay, wait a minute, there's going to be dust on this calendar. How do I choose to live it more creatively? And also, how do we learn to adjust to be present in future losses? A lot of my directees are shocked, now they're 80, are shocked that their friends are dying. Honey, you're 80. Your friends are anywhere from 80 to eternity, You're shocked because I think what they don't want to adjust to the fact that a large part of our eldering years is going to funerals. Funerals of relatives, friends. Why? Because you're outliving people. The good news is you're outliving. The bad news is you're burying people, And we have to adjust to the fact that there are losses, and you have to get ready that there will be more losses. Spirituality, in some sense of the afterlife, it has been shown statistically that people of faith and people who believe or experience intuition of the afterlife are more hopeful and healthy towards the end of their life, because they have a recognition that there's something more. Humor is very important. Okay, now we have in our community, we've had 5 brothers. 2 of them are significantly deaf. Okay, we're going through the deaf thing here. And what they hear sometimes versus what was said is hysterical. I mean, I'm talking about hysterical. Now, you said what? Completely missing the whole point whatsoever, like in planet X, Y, or Z. If you don't have a sense of humor, you're going to be very, very sad. Okay. And you have to have humor on yourself. Humor on yourself. And like for instance, I have to gauge the brothers after a while. Like once somebody had a doctor's appointment, once we started a doctor's appointment, then the whole rest of the meal could be doctor's appointments and, tests and, graphic needs and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, we call it the organ recital and the wine list. Okay, so at some point it's like, okay, time out. What happened today besides the hospital visit, the blood work, the urine sample, because we don't have to go through all of this. Because what happens is we become obsessed with these things and don't put it in proper perspective. Yeah, that's a part of life. It's not all of life. So you have to have a sense of humor. You have to have a symbolic life. That is, what are the signs of meaning in your life? What are the places? Now, religion and spirituality and spiritual direction and dream work, where do you get your messages of the purpose of your life? And seeing oneself as an ordinary human person. Now, there are ways in which we can have an unholy, what I call an unholy pact. Any of you familiar with the novel Portrait of Dorian Gray? Yeah. Okay, in which, in the attic, the painting is getting older and older and he's staying the same, okay? Well, he made a pact with the devil to do this. Now, of course, this metaphor is, this is the unholy pact. Instead of being who you are, you try and live an alternative life. There was an article, kind of a disturbing article, in the New York Times about some of these Florida retirement places, the villages, where there's an enormous problem with alcohol and drugs, actually pain medications and stuff, in which these folks are not living into their age, they're regressing back into another time. And not that everybody is doing that, but there's a temptation to make an unholy pact. I will not get old. I'll have the picture there and I'll let that get old, and I will continue to be vibrant and, on top of things and, looks. And so there's a danger of an unholy pact. There's awareness of the role of death anxiety, awareness of self-destructive. People can become angry and bitter. There are some serious choices we have to make about, do I let go of my wounds and my issues from the past, or do I pick at it, make it bleed? Do I kind of look at the past as a place in which I am always creating more anxiety? They say, Irish Alzheimer's is forgetting everything except the grudges, and, this is like, this is that kind of pact, all you think about is the negative stuff. Befriending the aging process of deepening of meaning. And what's important here is, Jung said, this really must occur from midlife on. Now, what he meant is, in the first half of life, one has to be committed to life here. You get married, you have a family, you build a home, you get a career. That's all the appropriate stuff for the first half of life. And you can have an intuition that there's more, but your real commitment of time and energy is to be in this world. Okay, until I was 40 years old, I had a career, I went to graduate schools, I began a whole process. Okay, that's all part of the first half. And at my point, now it's not only diminishment, it's handing over what I've created to people in the future. So the rest of my life is distributing what I've had. It's not creating anything new. It's sharing what I've had in my experience. If you don't do the first half, you can't do the second half. Okay, in the first half, you have to be committed to people, places, events, and there's nothing like hard work, responsibility, commitments to ground you in reality. Okay, the everyday hard facts of going to work, paying the bills, raising the kids, all that stuff. But that's not what happens in the second half. The second half begins to change, it shifts, which it should. But Jung said that there needs to be, instead of the outer world, you need to interject the energy in the inner world. You've got to rediscover. Now, let me make an exception to this. I have known younger people because, and this is a real one, I have a young man in late 20s who's been in recovery since he was about 20 years old. And at 28, okay, he really has gotten his life together. He's been in counseling and therapy. He's solid. But you know what's happened is he's had to look at some of the questions of the second half of life in the first half. So he doesn't fit in with his friends exactly like his friends. His friends are on cruise control. They don't have any of these questions. He's had to confront things that is usually in the second half. So that's a particular kind of journey, right? If you're dealing with the second half of life questions in the first half, that means you're going to have to go deeper into your journey, not just on the outside, but on the inside. Does that make sense? I remember when I was in California, I was in probably early 40s, and I had all of these guys from Silicon Valley Silicon Valley had gone through a slump, and all these guys were depressed and midlife and all that kind of stuff, and they're lined up outside my office, talking about all this stuff. And I had to laugh because I said, none of these guys would have talked to me in high school. I'm holding their hands as they're crying now, but they would have dismissed me in high school because I wasn't in the crowd. But what happened was I had to deal with a lot of second half of life issues in the first half, which changed my orientation. And what was happening is they were resistant to go where I had already been. This is the challenge of what it means to live. Use of memories to integrate past, present into a tapestry of life. Okay. I notice with people in the elder years, they have to remember significant events and people that they have thrown out. Like, that was back then. I don't want to look at that. Wait a minute. It's a part of the picture. And you need to integrate all the pieces. Some of the pieces are not particularly attractive, but they're part of your life. You need to integrate those. Eros moves into purpose, peace, hope, and acceptance. In life, the challenge to live life fully, right? The libido for Jung was not just sexual energy, it was all energy. People who have lots of energy are in relationship to their libido. Now, one of the most fascinating lecturers I ever listened to, and I listened to him both in the United States and also in Zurich, was Adolf Guggenbull Craig. Quite the name. His son now has inherited his father's practice, and he's also a Jungian analyst. But he wrote a book called The Old Fool. And he was looking at signs of mortality, signs that we are diminishing, and signs that are indicators of our diminishment. And what was really important for him was, these are not things to be ashamed of. These are realities that I need to live through and integrate. Now, if you've ever been, and those of you that are young, you've been with older people, right? I'm sure you have great grandfathers and stuff like that. Do you notice they repeat their stories? Grandpa says, you remember when oh God, the whole family goes, oh, I can't listen to that again. In 1946, I was like, I came out of the war and, you go through the battle scars and like, oh God, we went through this. And you say to yourself, why do people have to repeat? And what causes them to repeat the same issue? Okay. And he had a very interesting take on it. He says, people tend to repeat stories that are significant and they have never really fully accepted. And it's a way of naming it and acting it out in a way that gives it credence and affirmation. In other words, you tell a story because it never has fully been taken inside. It's been lived out and it's been articulated outside. And this happened to my mother towards the end of her life. She was, a child in the 1920s, I guess. Okay, I was a change of life baby. They were not expecting me. Let's say there was no bassinet that was ready. They were thinking this was all over. My sister was 16 years old and that was it. But I came along and disrupted everything. So, they were in their 40s when I was born. So that, there was they were like my grandparents. My sister was like my parent. It was all confused. And what happened was when she was young, and in those days, there was no social services. There was no such thing as, social workers dealing with schools. Her mother probably went into a postnatal depression. She had 5 children in a row, and I think she was just depressed. Okay. My grandfather was working at a mill, like 60 hours a week, trying to put food on the table. And they had no relatives around to be able to help. So my mother, who's 9 years old, is taken out of school to take care of the other children. 9 years old. Now, this gave me an entirely new understanding of her level of anxiety. She was always anxious. Imagine a 9-year-old taking care of other kids and your mother, and your father's working 60 hours a week he was working in a mill in New England at, God knows how many cents an hour. She would tell that story over and over again because it was her primary trauma that led her to be feeling like an orphan and living as an orphan her whole life. And it was never really put together. The story is repeated for her to grasp the significance of the story. Do you see what I'm saying? Like people have a war story that they tell, or they tell a story about the best old days or the worst old days. It's usually, and also, if grandpa has a couple of drinks in him, then it really comes out in a whole different scenario. And, the story goes on and on and on, and everybody runs out of the living room. But it's the significance of the events, right? It's not for nothing. And I think I have learned that when brothers do that, and my first thing is like, oh God, we have to go through this again. And I have to ask myself, what is he missing that he has to tell the story? And I try to ask a question about the event to pull it out beyond just the story. Because I think there's unfinished business. And the psyche just creates this unfinished business. Okay, gravity's sagging. Well, we're going back to the earth, and everything is going back to the earth. These mirrors here are not very good for your ego unless you're very young. It's pretty sad. And it's like, okay, aging is saying we're going back to the earth. and the stuff under the neck that starts going down, and the gravity of everything is a reminder that your body is moving towards the earth. And that, I always am amazed at Cher. Now, there must be more plastic with Cher than any other human being in the world, because she's wearing the same outfit she did with her original husband, like 50 years ago. So it's like her full-time job is to become plastic. Now, if I'm 73, she must be near 80, okay? And she's still wearing the same high heels and the whole thing. But this is the sadness. I mean, I don't see this as, a good, I think Betty White was a better model of aging with dignity and recognizing her age and living out of that. Cher is the sad social commentary of having to remain the same. Okay? She is, Dorian Gray. She's had to, and then she throws out the boyfriend and she has a new boy toy, and it's like, what? I mean, he could be your grandson. This is disgusting. You see what I'm saying? This is the dark side of not wanting. Waking at night. That is a tough one, right? I think my bladder has shrunk to the size of, like a chestnut or something, because if any liquid goes in there, okay, especially after 5 p.m., forget it, okay? So last night it was 12, 3, and 5, okay? Now, when you wake up in a new place, I don't even know where I am. I'm trying to get out of the bed. It's on the floor almost. I'm trying to go to the bathroom. By the time I find the lights, go to the bathroom, I'm wide awake. Okay, so then I try and fall back asleep. Then the pillows are not exactly right. Okay, you do the 3 o'clock thing. Okay, and then you look at the old alarm clock and say, "Oh no, there's another 4 hours before I have to get up." He called it the opportunity. Now, I don't always see this as an opportunity. The opportunity to ponder, mull, and pray. To ponder, mull, and pray. Now, we had 2 novices last year, both in their 20s. Of course, they could sleep anywhere. They would sleep on the couch fall asleep at 9 o'clock, and they would sleep throughout the night on the couch, not move, not get up at all. And it was like, this is a miracle. I don't know how it works. I don't even remember how it works, but it's like, I have tried to take some of the time by saying, I can't fall asleep. Okay. How do I ponder, mull, and pray? It might be vigils, but it's not the monastic Trappist vigils, it's the bladder vigils. And your body says, maybe you haven't finished processing something, physically and mentally. Okay. Short-term loss, long-term gain. You can't remember the person you met last week, but you can have a memory of something when you were 5 years old as if it was yesterday. It's a time when memories go to earlier times rather than normal recent times. And I think that has something to do with psychologically, you're beginning to withdraw from the present moment, which you're moving from. And you have longer time from where you came from. In other words, there's more time to integrate from your life. I mean, if you're 73, there's not 73 more years. So it's like you've got more of this thing to integrate than this thing to integrate. So it's less important for you to remember this. And so this was very important for me to see that, I am invested here as much as I can be, but my investments I listen to some of the brothers, and especially when we don't have guests and it's just us, they'll talk forever about the junior age when they were like 14 or 15 years old. Now I have nothing that I can associate with this, okay? But they reminisce with delight about events that happened that 70 years ago, And yet that is being integrated, and what's happening now is less important. So there's this danger of, reminiscing too much about the past and living in the past. But there is also the fact that there's much more to integrate in the past than there is in the present and into the future. Unscreened honesty. Okay. When you're older, you care less what other people think. Have you ever noticed that? Like you're very concerned where you're young. You want people to like you. We had a meeting at Mount St. Michael, and the brothers were all there, and they were in small groups. And one brother says in great full voice, "I'm too old for this bullshit." And everybody started screaming, laughing, right? Because it's like, I don't have time for this. I only have a few hours, maybe. I don't care. You can talk all you want. This is it. Okay? My mother was never great in repressing her feelings, but towards the end, there was no screening whatsoever. If she didn't like somebody, it was like, why is she here? Maybe because she's a relative and she's coming to visit you. She doesn't, like this unscreened honesty. Or sometimes there is also this integration of a shadow piece that have never been done. There was, and this is a true story, I won't say where or with whom, the names will be protected, but in an unnamed mother house in North America, I was giving a retreat, and they were talking about the sister, okay, and I think her name was Sister Annunciata or something like that. She taught the first grade her entire life, sweetness and light, okay? And in her dementia, she was a raging lunatic in which every four-letter word would come out. She'd be screaming at things and throwing things at the nurses, okay? And here's Mother Annunciata, and of course the nurses were screaming, laughing, because it was like the discontinuity, and the nuns were horrified on the floor that they would hear her go through this. But I think it's a lifetime of sweetness that burst at the end. She couldn't hold it in anymore. And it's like all of a sudden, what she really felt all those years really came out, okay? So that's a sign of unscreened honesty. Parting and leaving things unfinished. Okay. Everybody has to recognize that in life, you can't finish everything. You can't finish a project that you started, or a relationship that went sour, or whatever it was. You've got to be able to say, at some point in our lives, we have to say, we did our best and to move on. But, this can haunt people. And I'll give you an example. I was telling people that I was a frequent flyer to Rome for many years, because I would give the midlife and third age, and third age was people 70 years and older. Now, this is 20 years ago, so I was a lot younger. And when I would be interviewing the individual men, they would, you were like the extraordinary confessor of old. They never told this to anybody, but you're here and I can tell you because you're going to be gone, in 12 hours, so I can tell you whatever I want. So I heard all kinds of things, but one of the things that I heard was, and it was kind of it was sweet and sad and real. It was one of those brothers that during the 1970s, when so many religious were leaving and getting married, he had had an infatuation with a woman, and it was an intense moment, and he had to make a decision. Do I stay? Do I leave? What do I do? Many of his friends left and got married, and he discerned, that he was not going to leave and he was going to stay. Now here he is, probably in his 80s, reflecting back on his life. And of course, what are the things that haunt him? Unfinished business. Was that the right thing? What would have my life been if that would have happened? Would I have children? And it was haunting him, not that he regretted it, but it was unfinished. So what happens for most of us is we have to be compassionate on ourselves and say, with the information that you had and the person that you were at that moment, you made the best decision that you could. And now you are the person that you are from that decision. And you have to accept the fact that that unfinished business needs to be finished. So I had him write a parting letter to this woman, like expressing why he couldn't do that and who he is now and whatever. And he while I was there, and then at the end, I saw him again, and he read the letter to me, and it was beautiful. It wasn't regret. It was more like I've never said what I really wanted to say. It was unfinished. And in our lives, there are unfinished relationships. There are unfinished jobs that we walked away from, unfinished possibilities. You were offered graduate studies and you didn't take it. Or, you had responsibilities at home and you couldn't leave, and, you were taking care of your parent or whatever. All those things are a part of it. Your imagination still functions. In other words, it's shocking to people, but all people have sexual fantasies. And they have wild ones, and because I had a person say to me, and she was quite elderly, she said, I feel like a pervert, that I've never thought these things in my life. And I said, why do you feel this now? Because you never had these things in your life. And before you end this life, you're going to have them. Nature has a way of not letting anyone get through. You think like, oh, I put all that side away. No. What wasn't acted on or wasn't acceptable comes back to revisit, to say, this was you. This is you. You are an embodied human being. You're a sexual being. And these things don't identify you, but they show you your potential. Okay? Emphasis on the heart. Do you notice old people cry more? And I don't mean like, my father, until he was a certain age, I never remember him crying. But then all of a sudden he started. Now, this was a shock to me. He was the one that would kick me in the ass to go out to work in the farm. And all of a sudden now he's this mush, and like, what is happening here? Because I think as you get older, right, your barriers of holding your heart emotions. And he treated his grandchildren and great-grandchildren entirely different than he treated me. Because he was responsible to form me. He just loved them. So grandparenting is a whole way of loving, right? That's very different than even loving your own children. The emphasis on the heart means your emotions are more on the sleeves. I know a brother, that he's very, matter of fact. I see him sniffling through movies that I, would not have touched him at all. And all of a sudden now, his eyes are watering, and what is that all about? It's about the fact that our emotions have been blocked, most of the time from shame, especially men, that what they really wanted to do wasn't able to be done until later. And again, the persona is not as strong as when you're young. When you're young, your mask is very tight, okay? You take a 16-year-old, his mask is glued. He is not going to budge, okay? Right? I mean, unless this was the guidance counselor in me. There'd be a big fight. These two guys are about ready to kill each other, furious blood. I bring one into my office, and within 5 minutes, he was crying like a 5-year-old, okay? Because behind all that was all this emotion. So emphasis on the heart is that we can be easily touched and moved. And we're not losing control by doing that. We're actually gaining access. Do you see the difference? I'm not losing control. I now have access to material that I didn't have before. When I was 28, I couldn't do that. Maybe when I'm 68, I have access to it in a different way. Returning, what this means is going back to places for pilgrimage. Go back to a place where you grew up. I see a lot of pilgrimages, like, in Esopus, where our brothers are now. This was a boarding school. I see so many men during the summer coming with their wives, revisiting this place because it was a special place for them as kids and stuff. And they make a pilgrimage there, and they go to the cemetery, and they see the brothers who didn't leave and those who, that have left. And all of a sudden, this was a significant piece of my life, and I need to go back there, okay, to reclaim it, to see it. So I call these unconscious pilgrimages. They're not pilgrimages to Assisi or to Rome. They're pilgrimages of a personal nature. Why do you go back and you see this sometimes in movies, right? In which people have an experience just by being near a place that was significant to them earlier, okay? Facial connections and parental connections. Have you ever said something that your mother would have said? And you had pledged never to have said that. And you find yourself repeating the same thing. Isn't that kind of humiliating? Or my sister had a picture that her kids took a picture of her and had it on the refrigerator. I said, where did you get that picture of Mom? That wasn't Mom, that was me. You're kidding. It looked exactly like my mother. Now, I would have never said there would have been a parental connection there. Okay? I look at myself as I'm aging, I look just like my father's brothers. They all had, balding hair here, and then it started working its way across. All tall, big guys with the belly. And I'm saying, I'm just like them. It's just amazing to me. Okay? Facial connections or parental connections. Or you look at your hands and you say, oh my God, I'm getting the same wrinkles that they had, You realize that we're living into, it's scary, but we are, remember, products of who gave us life. And not to be surprised that, we repeat not only physically, but sometimes, in behavior. You say to yourself, oh my God, I'm channeling my father. And I don't like that part of me. Okay, the next page has to do with time, the use of time. If you do not know that you are mortal, that will distort the way in which you use your time. It will change your course of life, okay? Mortality helps us frame our choices around time. Now, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I started doing mentoring, mostly with younger men, helping them through transitions in their life and, finding careers, and I found that very beneficial for both of us, okay? This kind of mentoring, I think, came up spontaneously with the fact that I don't want to continue exactly what I was doing. I want to hand on. So since I was 70 and now I'm planning these, I'm doing all these programs to hand on my books, my experience, my preparations, the CDs, all the things that I have done for the last 40 years. It's time to move them into people who can use them in the future. If I think I'm going to live forever, I hoard all these things, and then you know what's going to happen? The brothers are going to throw out all the books that are worth thousands of dollars. I have no idea what it means. They're not going to recognize the value of things. They'll just clean out my computer, and that's the end of it. And I think aging has something to do with generativity, not just closure. What you want to hand on. Okay, and I see this sometimes with older women, with young women who are first-time mothers, helping them adjust to a working environment. For young men who are, adjusting to, new responsibilities. I think it's important that when you know that time is limited, it changes the way in which you want to use your time. And, our culture tells us that our elder years should be really a series of entertainments, that you should be entertained and, not really assess your life and to move it in a different way. Now, how can people lose time, precious time? And I find time is a very precious thing. And as you get older, and I think even young people can learn this, is that you never know what's going to happen. This might be the last time you talk to this person. When you have an argument, make sure that you say you're sorry or you create a bridge, because that they're in a car accident, that's the last thing you've said to them. You've got to be really cautious about the sacredness of time and not waste that time. Now, here are ways in which people can waste time. The first one is holding on to grudges and issues of the past. Okay? I know a certain brother, if he has 2 scotch, before dinner, slowly I turn, step by step. He goes back to the original grudge that happened in 1956 about the provincial who did this and this, okay? The provincial's been dead for 30 years in the cemetery. Nobody knows what he's talking about. But that grudge is wasting his precious space. It's taking his space and his time. So letting go of grudges is a very important part of the aging. It's also important to grieve what you have not grieved in the past. That's why sometimes visiting cemeteries can be therapeutic, to speak your truth to a deceased person that may have hurt you or may have abandoned you or whatever. Lost opportunities or lost loves distort your ability to live in the present moment. The expectation is everything should remain the same. Nothing remains the same, right? Nothing ever remains the same. Things are always changing. So well, it's not what it used to be. No, it's not what it used to be. Busyness is self-importance. This is one of the great illusions in elder years. I'm so indispensable that I have the illusion that unless I'm doing it, okay, I see this sometimes with women who they've always done Thanksgiving dinner, okay? They can hardly walk. There's like a walker there. They can't hold the turkey, they can't chop the celery, okay? But she's going to do Thanksgiving dinner, like hook or by crook. The whole family says, look, we'll all do it together, okay? Mom, you don't have to do it. The issue of the self-importance and indispensable is, can I be poor enough to let others do what I used to be able to do? That's an issue of poverty of spirit. Do I have to hold on till it's really ridiculous before, you're going to fall down with the turkey and it's not going to be a pretty picture on Thanksgiving Day? It's like, it's okay to not have to do everything. Negative intuition for the future. Oh God, you hear this all the time. They have a little cough because of, sinus infection. They now have cancer of the brain. And, they have to make an appointment next week because, you're going to be in recovery for years over there. Like negative intuition, like no matter what happens, okay? It's all of a sudden over dramatized. Okay, the fear of the future. And I know most of us have fears about, not so much about dying, but how we're going to die. And I have a friend who just found out that she has Lou Gehrig's disease. But that's one of the worst ways of dying, and it's like, I wouldn't wish it on anybody. But, we could all go crazy thinking about what could happen or what might happen. So negative intuition, obsession with youthful attitudes. Youthful attitudes lead to sometimes youthful behavior when it's not appropriate. Okay. Have you ever have a family member or a friend who is like dresses inappropriately? Like that could have been appropriate maybe 20 years ago, but the bulges are not in the same places where it used to be. And what used to be attractive now is like, what? When you're holding on, when you can hardly walk and you're in spikes, and no, these youthful things, wear your sneakers before you fall. It's like obsession with youth. Because there's a fear, obviously, right? It's fear. Relationships with time and discernment, running out of time. What I notice with some people as they age, they get into permanent indecision. I can't make up my mind. They have to make a decision and they can't make it. And sometimes, if they're quite elderly, family members have to make the decision that they couldn't make. This happened with my mother. She was, living. We had a farm, and she was alone in the original farmhouse. She'd leave the stove on. The refrigerator freezer door was open. It was melting. It's like she was a walking disaster. And in her mind, okay, she was still in control, and it was her house. Okay. And when my sister and I had the conversation with her, she said, she took out the ultimate authority. Who's the mother here? And my sister rightly said, I'm the mother here because I have to take care of two houses. I've got to take care of my house and I have to worry about your house. If it's going to burn down or melt away or whatever it's going to do. Okay. So you've got to make decisions when it's time to make decisions. Call to live in the present moment, conscious aging. What conscious aging simply means is I no longer fight the fact that I'm aging, which means when I fight it, it goes unconscious. Conscious aging is my acceptance of my reality and befriending that reality so that I can have a more creative response to aging. And towards the end of our lives, well, you know, we have to realize that, you know, the amount of energy going for funerals, you know, takes more and more time. We go to funerals and jubilees, you know, and
doctors.
and plenty of doctors. As I say, there was a time when you had one doctor. Now you have a doctor for every piece. And so the celebration piece is, you know, you celebrate, but you also, there's sacrifice. There are losses. And to recognize that those losses are important. The next 2 pages are really questions for you to reflect on in your quiet time, okay? Being able to look at what's presented here. Tonight, I wanted to look at how do I learn to embrace mortality? And beginning tomorrow and Sunday, we're going to look at what are the intimations of immortality? What are the bridges being created by God now for us to recognize that this is not all of it, and that there are manifestations that we oftentimes don't read, but are there, about the fact that we came from nothingness and moved towards a different form of nothingness, that is the emptiness of God. We're going towards God in its completeness. And there are a lot of signs. And as a spiritual director, I think I've been blessed with witnessing dozens and dozens of signs given to people about this transition. So at this point, I don't feel at all that I need to believe in the afterlife. I am quite certain that there is an afterlife and that God is preparing us for this. And the important aspect of it is, can I read the signs? Or are the signs all around me and I'm not reading them? You know, I'm getting, do you remember the first movie of, oh God, the series with the magician, magic place. Oh, what is it? You know, there was like the 8 volumes of the Harry Potter. Remember the very first Harry Potter movie? Okay, the first one was always more, I love the first one. The others were like a little weird, but the first one was really good. And remember when he was getting the invitation to go? Okay. And he got the invitation and the uncle hid it and ripped it up. Was that the end of the invitation? No, it started coming. Any place where there was an opening, all of a sudden, like he's being like thousands of like, well, that's what I feel like the psyche does to us. You know, we get an invitation and we go, oh, well, this is interesting, you put it down. And then another one comes, and then another one. And before you know it, you're flooded with all of this material. And what it's basically saying is, there's more. Do you want to know about the more? Or do you want to live in your narrow little world? Are you ready to receive the more and live from that place? Or do you just want to stay fixated in your world? Okay. So I think this might be an appropriate time. If there are any clarifying questions, either from the group in person and or on Zoom that you would like to present. We have about 20 minutes left before the end of our session. Would anyone like to clarify questions or comments or something that might be helpful? I mean, I gave you a lot of material for the opening, but it's like, this is what struck you, or what did you feel intriguing? Yes.
So something about just understanding yourself better, be able to integrate your
That's right.
past, present, future. I'm noticing this page 10. I think Carl Jung came up with what is now used as the basis for the Myers-Briggs.
That's right. We're going to talk about typology tomorrow.
Oh, okay, all right.
Okay, typology is what he developed. Tomorrow, we're going to look at sensate and intuition, which is the way in which we gather information. And we get the information about mortality through our senses, and we get our information about immortality through intuition. And that's why, as we get older, we need to let go of the sensate data and move towards the intuitive data, because that's preparing us for the next life. So exactly, we're going to do, he wrote the book on typology in 1928, which began at the foundations of what was later taken by Myers and Briggs and put into that exam. Yeah. Anyone else, either on Zoom or? Yes.
We have a comment on Zoom. It says, call to live in the present moment on page 6. I did not catch any comment on that, but I am very curious. I'm sorry, I may have missed it. Could you please reiterate?
Yes. Well, this was in relationship to time. If you're living in the past, and everything important was in the past, then you're not living in the present moment, which means you're not engaged in present reality because you're too much living in the. See, there's the difference between integrating the past and living in the past. Integrating the past is I take it in and then I let it go. The past is the past. Then I can live in the now. It doesn't have to color my experience. So living in the now is having processed and integrated all those things that we talked about that might block us. Then I can live more in the present. Because so often I notice with elderly people, they live out of a gut response to things that happened in the past. They're not living in the present moment, which sabotages joy. No pun here, but it does sabotage joy. Anyone else for a comment or question?
I was thinking, when people experience things not working out the way they have dreamed,
Right.
Relationships ending, is maybe especially that much is having to face one's own mortality.
Right.
And interesting.
I think when we have to let go of those things, the unfinished business, okay? The first thing is you have to learn to grieve what's appropriate to grieve, okay? Just to let it go. The second is unfinished business is part of the human condition. And we tend to personalize it like, oh, woe is me. I never finished this. Well, if you sat in a room with a lot of people, there's probably unfinished business in everybody's personal life. The things that were never said, things that ended, things that were never finished, or dreams that were never lived out. So it's like, how would I say? Not to inflate this, but to see it as part of the human condition. And how does it apply particularly to your life in the human condition?
I was thinking even I perhaps have these false expectations of institutions.
Oh, yeah.
And a kind of realization that they're never going to be idealized the way I want them to.
Right. Yeah.
But I guess they're mortal like us.
Well, this is part of the human condition. We're constantly disappointed by those that we had higher expectations of, including ourselves. I had higher expectations of myself, and I kind of didn't really rise to the occasion on several occasions. Yes.
When was doing the HIV population before all the medication and stuff. We had compulsory group work with our clinical supervisor. It was necessary in private sessions twice a month. Do you always think that about all these young people dying? Because they were in those days, they were dying at 25.
Yeah,
Imagine what they were when they were 12.
Right.
Right. But all this unfinished business, we were taking it.
yes,
But what could we do?
right.
It took a lot of work for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, I remember I had a student that had died of AIDS that I journeyed with in New York during that epidemic period, you know, and it was tragic. I mean, a young person, you know, dying, but also it was a single mother burying her youngest child. I mean, it was awful, you know. But you know, there's a lot in life that's just unfinished. Doesn't make it bad. It just, I think we forget that in life, and I see this with young people trying to make decisions where there's like 4 doors in front of them. And one of the things is in life, once you walk through a door, the other doors have to close. You can't have all 4 doors open all the time. Okay? When you close that door, those other doors, it doesn't mean those are the wrong choices. It just means you can't have everything. And that's part of the human condition. You can't have everything.
We call
It-
it FOMO,
Yeah,
missing out.
yeah, exactly. Yes, you have a question from Zoom?
Yes, we have a question from the group. And when you get questions from the gallery, if you wouldn't mind repeating it. they
Oh,
asked.
sure.
So I have a comment from one of our guests who says, it seems that dreams can inform us of what to do at the end of life. I am thinking of one dream where I drained a hose and wrapped it up only to find a second hose I didn't need, but also could not save it and add it to the first hose.
Yes, that's right. What we're going to deal with tomorrow is dreams. In all of those situations that we talked about initially, about how do dreams inform us about our relationship to mortality and choices and discernment, but also how does it initiate us into immortality? Because I think what we realize with dreams is the dream state is not produced by the ego. So immediately we're receiving material from another space. If we're receiving material from another space, then that means that there is another space. And therefore, are we open to the fact that I need to be in relationship to that space because it's giving me information about a bigger picture of me? You know, what happens to us is we all have a sense of, oh, this is who I am. I taught high school for 25 years. I would have arguments with a 15-year-old saying, I know who I am and I can't change. And I used to say, you're 15, you know, this is just the beginning, okay? But he would be, you know, or you would, you know, you'd have a suicidal boy, his girlfriend dumped him. It's like, you're beginning, you know, this is not the end. But, you know, when you're caught up in the complex, it feels like the end, even though it's not. And even at old age, it still has that thing, you know, there's more. And I'm discovering, working with so many people with material from the unconscious, that the unconscious is always advocating an expansion of our understanding of self. Jung said that we walk in shoes too small. You know, we have not expanded who we are, and we're constricted. And until we walk in the proper shoes, we will not have the proper relationship to ourselves. Anyone else have a comment or question before we close? So tomorrow we begin immortality, and we begin with the nature of intuition and the significance of intuition for bridging the mortal and the immortal. And then we'll go from intuition to dreams to synchronicity, the life after life experiences, to presences after death. And also, I'm going to end with the communion of saints. And I just want to tell this story at the end. I have an 85-year-old directee, very Italian. She says to me, I love this. She says, to me, God is too big. I can't deal with him. But St. Anthony, I can deal with. This is the Italian, right? And every time I have a session with her, God is too big. I can't deal with this. St. Anthony, he comes through. Okay, and I think what's important is in that lesson is there's something truthful about what she says. It's not the power of St. Anthony versus the power of God. It's the power of being able to be in relationship to the other side. It's easier to be in relationship to St. Anthony because he was here. And in that way, you befriend the other side through the saints. Okay, so we're going to end on Sunday with, the devotion to the saints as a means of recognizing that we're more than corporal, and that the communion of saints, we've already befriended on the other side. We have friends here, and we have friends on the other side. And when I mean by friends on the other side, I really mean friends, not like magical thinking. You actually, have a relationship, a living relationship with somebody who's already crossed over. Okay, so we'll end here. Thank you.